Welcome to Worldview Matters, discussing controversial issues, discerning current events, defending biblical Christianity. No topic off limits. And now, here's your host, David Fiorazzo.
Hey guys, thank you so much for tuning in. God bless you. And we've got John Haller, Fellowship Bible Chapel, and he does some amazing prophecy updates, and that's what we're going to be talking about today, some of the information and craziness that's happening around the world. And when you have John Haller on, you have all kinds of pages of notes that you may never get to, but you never know what direction you're going to go. John Haller, welcome back to Worldview Matters. Good
Hey,
to see you,
David,
buddy.
I do it to myself. I was telling you before we started that I was sort of researching, getting ready for my update today, and people always, well, do something in the middle of the week. And I'm like, so I decided I need to reboot my computer before we started recording. And I went to close Firefox, the browser I use mostly, and I had 95 tabs open.
That's
and
really
I started fresh this morning. So
wow,
that happens all the time anymore.
All right. My goodness. So bring us up to speed on some of these things, John. First of all, this will be a quick story because we're going to be talking about AI and globalism and the World Economic Forum and all that. But let's talk about the injustice of the Biden Department of Justice and this story, which doesn't surprise us. We've been talking about it for years. I've been documenting the attacks on pro-life pregnancy centers, on Christians, on churches. But in this case, 6 pro-lifers, including a father of 11, were convicted for what? Praying and singing hymns. I saw the video outside of a Tennessee abortion mill. So, John, this shouldn't surprise us, but it's just really disappointing that it's happening so quickly.
No, and remember, it was just a little over a year ago that we conservatives were all excited because the Supreme Court had overturned Roe versus Wade and Casey versus Planned Parenthood cases, which meant that it threw the abortion issue back to the states. But I can tell you here in Ohio, they put through a pro-abortion amendment to the state constitution, and it passed, including in my conservative county where I live, north of Columbus, long a very red county. It passed with about 2/3 of the vote, approving this essentially abortion on demand up through the time of birth amendment in the state of Ohio, with, by the way, veto-proof majorities in the House, in the Senate, and a Republican governor. So wow. So what they've done is it's sort of a bigger story, but this is sort of a small part of it. They're weaponizing the justice system against conservatives and people that do not agree with the regime on many, many issues. Yeah. People need to pay attention to this. I see Facebook is saying they're going to take down all anything political, and I think it means anything political that we don't agree with. And we'll talk a little bit about AI in just a moment, but there is a big push to control the information. When the World Economic Forum had the launch for their meeting a couple weeks ago, they always just before the meeting release their thing called their Global Risk Report. You can go download it. It's a very slick report in PDF format. 2024 global risk. And the main risk that they talked about was the risk of misinformation and disinformation. So as I was out at lunch today, I would just happen to run by Glenn Beck podcast from yesterday, and he was talking about the fact that there's this new organization that the White House is using called Center for Countering Digital Hate. Counterhate, I think, .com is the website. And it's just one guy, David, as far as everybody can tell. And he's raked in millions, and he has become the go-to person for controlling information on the part that the White House wants to control. Now, look, so the FACE Act that these people in Tennessee were convicted under, there were some others that were found not guilty, but there's still some others waiting trial, including, I think, one is an 83-year-old grandmother up in Philadelphia. And when these people are arrested, they send out multiple police FBI cars, long rifles and everything to arrest these people, usually at like 4 or 5 a.m. in the morning. And I've done some white collar cases, so I know that this is standard FBI modus operandi, particularly when they want to intimidate people. But there's a lady extreme pro-abortion person and attorney in the Department of Justice. And this is sort of what she's working on full time, is to go after people who protest abortion clinics. Now, I think the law, by the way, David, is unconstitutional because it restricts free speech. And you can see from the video, these people were sitting in a hallway.
Yeah.
People could still, they weren't blocking the hallway. They weren't blocking access. And now they could go to prison for 10 years, federal prison for 10 years, and they face fines of $260,000.
Now, are you talking about the FACE Act?
Yeah, the FACE Act, the anti-abortion, it's something to protect abortion clinic
it says,
access or something.
Yeah, freedom of access to clinic entrances.
Okay, yeah, it's called the FACE Act.
FACE Act.
And that's what, and so they're going after people on that. And they're going to, this with organizations like Countering Hate. Well, I'll give you another example. I think I sent you this. There's a new act that's been proposed in Congress, and I don't think it'll pass. Not with the way Congress is, although they're not able to seem to do much of anything right these days anyway, or anything for the right. And the Senate is completely lost to us. But they've proposed legislation in the House. Jamie Raskin, that radical leftist guy who wears the do-rag sometimes from California. Senator Ed Markey from Massachusetts is a big supporter. It's called Preventing Private Paramilitary Act of 2024. Mm-hmm. And in the act, it says, if you're in a group, you organize as a group. Now, they use the term, you got to cross state lines, because that's required for federal jurisdiction. But by the way, that's not required under the FACE Act. But in this one, they're requiring the state lines. And as again, I don't think it'll pass, but it shows the mentality of the people that are trying to control everything. And if you have a group of 3 or more and you engage in military training for private military or security services, okay, that violates the act. Violation of the act, particularly if there's any injury involved, that for, say, somebody comes in, let's say church, you have 3 people on your church security team. Let's say somebody comes from Indiana and wants to attack your church. And by the way, we do have a security service staff at Fellowship Bible Chapel because of the subjects that I talk about. We do have an armed deputy sheriff and I know, I don't hardly know any church that does not do this anymore. In fact, we saw Joel Osteen's church got attacked on Sunday by a lady. Yeah. Well, we're not sure if it's a lady or a man. That's another part, another subject for another show.
Jeez.
But so if you have 3 or more and you violate the act, that's a year in jail. And there's also civil forfeiture penalties that go along for violating the act, which means you forfeit all real and personal, you can be made to forfeit all real and personal property used in the meeting of the security team.
Wow.
Now, you know what this is designed to do, and it's designed to intimidate. And now, again, I don't think it'll pass. I think it's blatantly unconstitutional. It does seem to violate the First Amendment right to peacefully assemble, free association, and free speech. But that doesn't matter to these people.
Well, that's never stopped them before.
No.
What concerns me is part of the article at the Federalist on this. It says the defense for the pro-lifers repeatedly noted that in this case, the Mount Juliet protest did not result in injury and property damage or anything like that. It wasn't violent, but that didn't stop the Biden DOJ from twisting evidence to deceptively portray these pro-lifers in a bad light. But anyway, we've got to move on because we've talked a lot about this. We saw this coming. We knew it was coming, and now it's just ramping up. And because we've talked about all the pro-life pregnancy centers and churches that were attacked, vandalized, firebombed.
Yeah.
And was anybody arrested?
Nobody's been arrested or prosecuted for any of those that I know of.
So,
it's not
John,
America anymore.
Yeah, this is really disheartening. We also want to talk about, the World Government Summit that you mentioned. You sent me some notes on that. We just have a few minutes before we have to take a break. So just get us started on your initial thoughts.
Well, so this is the season of the big meetings where all the globalists and the technocracy type people want to get together. So they have an annual meeting in Dubai, in the United Arab Emirates. They all get together, and it used to be called the World Government Summit, but I think that they were getting too much heat from the people who were pointing out they want to have a one world government. So this year they changed the name to the World Government Summit. But it doesn't seem like I'm not feeling any better about it. So the keynote speech was by Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum, which just had its big meeting in Davos a few weeks ago.
Yep.
And he came in and he said, listen, we stand at the dawn of a new age, the fourth industrial revolution I've been talking about. And then he repeated what he had said back in Chicago in 2018 at a Chicago Council for Business Affairs meeting. And he talked about with AI and everything, we're looking at the fusion of our biological, our digital, and there's three selves. Our three selves are all being fused together with this technology. And we need to make it good. And we need to make people think that it's for their own good that we're doing it. And so at Davos, the title of that meeting was called Rebuilding Trust. But as I watched, and they brought in a few people, they brought in the guy from the Heritage Foundation who just lit them up. You people are the problem. And he really raked them over the coals. And he said there were people in the front row that literally were having a meltdown when he was speaking. And he was very direct. You guys, you bring in the Chinese like they're your friends and you're the problem. You want to control everything. And so what they did was they brought in a few people like that. And I think it was sort of a head fake, like in boxing, when you do the head fake. And it was to get people to think, oh, well, they're starting to see that they've gone too far, that they want to control. But they talked about Disease X at the World Economic Forum meeting, and other things. But this fusion of ourselves, this is the technocratic dream. And by the way, David, this goes across every government, every platform, everything. So they had Sam Altman there, who's talking about how great this AI, artificial intelligence. And by the way, note that it's always called artificial intelligence. It's never called real wisdom. So they think that they will get very, very smart. So he's out raising $7 trillion right now, going to all of these meetings to raise this money to build the physical infrastructure that's needed to run all of these server farms and computer these computer buildings and that type of thing. And it takes a lot. I mean, 20 minutes from me in Albany, Ohio, is big server farms. Meta, Facebook has 6 buildings as long as the Empire State Building is tall, laying on its side. In a field across the road is Google has spent $6 billion on construction costs. And I can tell you from looking at that, I was just out by there last week just to check on progress. About half of the area of Google is cooling towers because they need that, these computers generate so much heat, they have to constantly be cooled. So cooling towers is big. They need a lot of power. Microsoft is using AI, training AI so that it can develop ways to short circuit, to speed up the approval process for nuclear power plants. They want to build small nuclear power plants with their server farms because they don't think the grid will be sufficient to keep up. Wow. So this takes a lot of electricity, and everybody wants to talk about green energy and wind farms and that type of thing. So there's a logistics issue. NVIDIA, and I don't know when we're breaking, but NVIDIA has a new chip that they brought out. They have new computers they brought out. They cannot build them fast enough for AI. If you bought NVIDIA stock 10 years ago, put $10,000 in NVIDIA, you would be a multi-billionaire right now. Their stock went up 4 times last year. So it's growing. And this chip that they have, it's about the size of an iPad here. and it has at least 200 billion transistors on it, each chip.
Wow.
And they're selling them as fast as they can. So they're making a lot of money. And OpenAI, everybody says, well, how's AI going to make money? OpenAI generated $2 billion either in profit or revenue in the last quarter. And it's only a year. It's really only rolled out a year ago.
Amazing.
So this is going to revolutionize the world. And so then when you go to that countering hate thing that I talked about a few minutes ago, that single guy is using AI to try to shut down all kinds of people. And like Glenn Beck says, we're getting throttled on YouTube with our videos, and we're not even talking about the things they say we're talking about. But this guy has so much power now that he's getting the government, and the government's getting the tech companies to shut down speech, which when I read the First Amendment, I didn't think they were allowed to do that.
Yeah. Well, we're in a different age.
It doesn't seem to make any difference.
Well, and you said before, we are in a different country now, a much different country. Right. Hey, we're going to just skip the break because we got to get to this next story. Okay. I do want a shout out to our friends at harbingersdaily.com, World News, Biblically Understood. They're one of the sponsors of Worldview Matters, and we appreciate Harbingers Daily very, very much. And John, you did
Great
a
website,
recent...
by the way.
Yeah, you did a recent update at Fellowship Bible Chapel on YouTube. It was a prophecy update about a week or so ago called The Beginning of a New Era in Human History. And we want to talk about, I'm going to actually play this clip from Prince Charles and some of the things that he said. I understand it's from a couple of years ago, but it's eye-opening that I don't think we were paying attention, and we better start. He's talking about trillions of dollars. He's talking about needing a vast military-style campaign to marshal the strength of the global private sector, and he's speaking at the United Nations Climate Change Summit. So please set up this 1-minute clip for us.
Yeah, it was at COP20, I think COP26 in Glasgow, Scotland. 2 years ago. And you need to know that he's been a big proponent of coming in the UN Sustainable Development Goals, want to get them all put in place and well underway and met by 2030. Everybody's pushing this 2030 thing. And so he came to the COP26 conference, and this is what he had to say.
The scale and scope of the threat we face call for a global systems-level solution based on radically transforming our current fossil fuel-based economy to one that is genuinely renewable and sustainable. So, ladies and gentlemen, my plea today is for countries to come together to create the environment that enables every sector of industry to take the action required. We know this will take trillions, not billions of dollars. We also know that countries, many of whom are burdened by growing levels of debt, simply cannot afford to go green. Here we need a vast military-style campaign to marshal the strength of the global private sector. With trillions at its disposal, far beyond global GDP, and with the greatest respect, beyond even the governments of the world's leaders, it offers the only real prospect of achieving fundamental economic transition.
John Haller, what does he mean by that?
I'm wondering when he says with trillions at his disposal, and I've gone back, I've listened to this thing, I grabbed the original video. That's not how the transcript came out when the royal family put it up on their website. They kind of edited that. And so a lot of people, when we talk in Bible prophecy, are like, well, what's this coming son of perdition, man of sin, this global world leader that everybody's going to view as a savior of mankind? And did he slip up and mention that this person's around? I mean, that's kind of an interesting thing, and it's what he said.
Yeah.
The interesting thing, though, is while he was there, and around the time of this meeting in Glasgow, and they've since had one in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, and then they just had COP28 early January, I think it was early January, late December in Dubai again, in Abu Dhabi.
Mm-hmm.
And they had this thing, they had a thing called the Tree of Life in their pavilion. I'm telling you, the thing we need to keep in mind is there's this huge religious component to this. So when you hear the tech guys talk about the fusion of ourselves, Elon Musk company, they just put a chip in somebody's brain. They now have 3D printed brain tissue that they're putting into people. They're altering DNA in some of these healthcare treatments. And I don't think they understand the genie's out of the bottle. We're not putting it back. And so there's a couple things coming up. So Prince Charles put out a thing called the Terra Carta organization. He created it. Now, if you go to England, you go to the British Library, you will see one of the original copies of the Magna Carta from the 1200s that King John had them sign about. It really was sort of the foundation for a lot of the freedoms that we used to have in the West. And so here's Charles taking this historical document and porting it over to climate change. So the technocrats want to control everything, and it's developing very, very quickly. One of the sessions at Davos was a session called Quantum's Black Swan. So they've sort of reached the limits of how small they can make things. But now they're talking about molecular manufacturing, and they're also talking about quantum computing. Mm-hmm. So they asked this, one of the ladies on the panel was one of the executives from IBM, and she said, I think you're asking me, the question is, if quantum computing comes, and it's going to be millions and millions of times more powerful and faster than anything we have right now. Ray Kurzweil says that you soon will be able to go out and buy essentially a supercomputer by about 2029 for $1,000 in today's money. So she said, is this going to cause a techno Armageddon? That's the exact words that she used. And she said, the answer is yes. And nobody's controlling it. So as I was researching this today for Sunday, I was going back and looking at old speeches from 2017. Elon Musk saying, we've got to control this. Vladimir Putin says, whoever controls, in 2017, said, whoever controls this will control the world. Wow. And nobody has done anything to control it. Everybody says, we're going to regulate it, but nobody's regulating it.
Regulate. When you say control, you mean regulate, monitor?
Right.
Okay.
It's out of control.
Yeah.
And it's not regulated, and nobody's going to regulate, because how do you if you regulate it in the US, China's going to go ahead. Or Russia's going to go ahead, or Europe's going to go ahead. So I just think we're entering into a very weird time in human history where all of these things are coming together. In a November news conference that Vladimir Putin had, and the guy's amazing. He does these 2-hour, 4-hour interviews, never gets up and goes to the bathroom or anything like that. I don't know how he does it. He's about my age. I think it's almost a superhuman power that he has there. And they said, Mr. President Putin, we have another question for you. And this person is on video, and a video pops up, and it looks like Vladimir Putin. And it starts asking him a question. If you want to watch my update on Sunday, I will play you a copy of it. It starts speaking in Putin's voice. And he goes, what are you going to do about AI? And when the guy starts speaking, Putin's eyes, like, they go, what? He goes, well, and then he kind of joked. He goes, are you really the real Putin? Because we think that Putin has 3 or 4 body doubles that he uses at all these meetings. That's why he never goes to the appears to never go to the bathroom. So I'm just saying, David, is we live in such a very strange time of human history.
Well, let me just say this, friends, you know John Haller and his ministry, you know me. If you ever hear or see us talking about something unbiblical, heretical, or profane or something, and it's in our voice, and you better double check that source. That's probably AI. What do you think they're going to do to Trump? John, we've got 2 minutes left, but they're going to use this leading up to the election.
Well, so this is the weaponization of the legal system is going against Trump. And by the way, they're doing the same thing to Bibi Netanyahu. In fact, I ran across an old Facebook post that I put up like 6 years ago about the legal cases against Bibi Netanyahu. I was in Israel a year ago at the Christian Media Summit. I was over at the Knesset, and I asked the people, like, when are these cases against Netanyahu ever going to be over? And I had forgotten they'd already been going 5.5 years at that point. They said, well, probably in the next 5 or 6 years. They're doing it to control Netanyahu, just like they're doing the exact same thing here. There's a very close parallel. So this morning, the Washington Post, because this relates to the Middle East, and we don't have time to get into that today, but, Biden team, the Biden team, I think it's clear that it's the Biden team now, is trying to appease Iran and force Israel to accept and the Palestinians to accept a Palestinian state, even though, now, why do you reward somebody for these horrific acts of terrorism that were committed on October 7th? And so here's a front page headline on the Washington Post this morning. In advancing peace, Trump fueled Palestinian rage. So do you see the narrative now coming? And there's a 2-page spread in there, like, this is how Trump's going to manage the Middle East, because what Trump did with Jared Kushner and then assisted by Ron Dermer and some others in the Israeli government, they came up with this vision for peace plan. Now, I didn't like it. Yeah. It did divide up the land of Israel, which I think is one of the reasons for judgment that we read about in the books of Joel and Hosea. It's coming, but they said, listen, we'll never get anywhere with the Palestinians, so let's just make peace with these Arab countries. And so on September 22nd, 2 weeks and a day before October 7th in Israel, that horrible attack, Netanyahu stood in the well of the UN 2 days after Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, said, this is going to be a historic agreement between us and Israel. We're getting it done. And Bibi at the UN said, we are on the verge of a new Middle East. And 2 weeks and a day later, October 7th happened, and the world, well, how many times do we have to say this every time we talk? The world will never be the same.
Yeah.
And so we're rapidly approaching this time of the end when Jesus returns. It's going to accelerate from here.
Yeah. And as you said before, I think before we even got on the show today, you cannot keep up with everything. So that's our encouragement. I believe, John, you would also say your heart is, friends, don't try to keep up. You will become overwhelmed, but remember to overcome evil with good. And that says Romans 12:21. Do not conform to the world's ways. So much discernment we need these days, John Haller. But thanks for your time. Thanks for all the research. And thanks for making me work and get all these notes put together. I love you, brother. God bless.
Thank you.
All right, friends. Thanks again for watching, for sharing the podcast. And God bless you. And keep speaking the truth about things that matter.